You can't change your face like you can change your password. Your face is always with you. Your face is always visible. So facial recognition, in theory, leads to a kind of continual state of surveillance, whether you like it or not.
The more we normalize those invasive technologies, the less we are likely to actually question and criticize the intention behind surveillance technologies. Someone somewhere is keeping a record of everything that happens in our life, and there's no essence of the core individual.
Privacy is usually pretty high up on their list of concerns when it comes to digital media. But then they get on Facebook, where everything they do online is tracked. They carry around a phone with them that collects huge amounts of data about them throughout the course of the day, even when they're sleeping.
We would do more to protect our privacy if we could. Sometimes we simply don't know how. What is important is that we have more choice in how our data is collected and used. Those digital traces are quite revealing of us.
Surveillance capitalism is making money off the harvesting and processing of personal information about people. The fact that these huge, very expensive tech companies can run quote unquote for free shows just how valuable that data is.
Data is generated by every swipe, every click, every time we turn a piece of technology on. And that data can be used to track, monitor both people and what they're doing, but also more interestingly, how people are feeling and their kind of mental states as well. Personal data doesn't necessarily have to directly identify us. You can identify an individual from about 10 different data points. So your geographical location, your occupation, your salary level, all of these things can be really identifiable. As soon as you can link a piece of data to a person, then the value goes through the roof.
To say to somebody, well, if you don't like the data collection, just get off the grid. It's a huge ask. What would you do? Many people, they wouldn't be able to do their work. Many people wouldn't be able to be in contact with friends and family.
We are effectively willfully giving over a whole heap of our personal information and data to private companies like Facebook and TikTok and Instagram and the like. In many ways, that's used as a justification for increasing the way in which our data is able to be captured by government. There is a very big difference between people wanting to hand over photos of their weekend via Instagram and giving very sensitive information to government in a way that could be used against them in, for example, a criminal prosecution.
I don't think people have any idea how intrusive the data collection is and the techniques that are used to make sense of that data and put it to use. When you talk to people about data collection, they almost always think about it through the lens of interpersonal monitoring. Oh, somebody at Google, they're not going to be interested in looking at my searches. First of all, it's machines that are looking at our data. And second, what they're doing is they're aggregating it and they're looking for overall patterns that can be used to predict our behavior in order to be able to engage in forms of influence.
There are serious questions to be asked by an individual when they are using those technologies in terms of who's keeping my data, how is my data being used. These are massive global corporations. The control of these apps and companies should be an international collaborative effort. It should not be left by individual government.
The very big companies who have really founded their business models on collecting data, chances are probably very low that they would change their business model by themselves. Our cybersecurity group at Monash tries to combine technical, very mathematical research on cryptography with very practical applications. It's perfectly possible to build solutions in a way that data is not stored over a long time or not even stored at all.
The question of what to do about data surveillance is really tricky. This is something that the industry, governments, state agencies and civil society needs to do together. And one of the things we're trying to do with our research at Monash is work out ways that we can get those partnerships working between all of the bodies that really need to start thinking about this seriously.
the Australian government is reviewing the Privacy Act. There's a number of measures that the government could take to better protect our data. One is to increase transparency of practices, so that is to require companies to explain more fully and in a more understandable way which of our data are used, in what circumstances they're collected, who they're disclosed to, and what happens with them, also at the end of the data life cycle, whether they be deleted and so on.
Well, very often there's a good justification for collecting data. For example, study effects of behaviors of people, for example, induced by the COVID-19 situation, where research can use the data to really understand how the effects of the virus were, how it was distributed, and then build models to predict how we need to behave to get rid of the virus.
If someone had told us a year ago that we need to leave our name every time we go into a cafe and sit down, to have a flat white, we would have been quite horrified and we probably would not have done it. But now we see it as something that is necessary for the protection of public health and also necessary simply for us to allow us to go into a cafe. That shows that privacy is not an absolute value.
During COVID, we've seen a really drastic increase in the level of surveillance of just people in their everyday lives. And our concern is that it won't disappear at the same rate that it appeared. What we want to do is have a conversation about the type of community and society we want to have as we come into a period where the COVID numbers are reducing.
COVID has accelerated a lot of trends that were already in place. So the idea of being in a kind of post-touch, distanced environment suddenly makes these technologies really, really attractive.
I was looking at a company that can detect whether or not you're wearing your mask correctly. So you try to enter into the facility, you've got the mask below your nose, it says it's not going to let you in until you adjust your mask. The ability to detect symptoms and manage behavior and to facilitate touchless forms of interaction, those are all capabilities that are being built into smart camera systems and all ways in which the facial recognition industry has seen the COVID moment as a way of imagining a whole host of marketing opportunities.
And we're finding more and more that facial recognition is also creeping into our everyday devices. You might unlock your smartphone with your face, for example. And when you're doing something like that, it's very easy to lose sight of the more dangerous uses of facial recognition.
We tend to think about facial recognition in the register of identification. Oh, I can be identified. But there's a whole additional dimension that's being looked at. Much of the debate around facial recognition technology is around bias and accuracy. Bias and accuracy are both addressable issues. I think we're going to have to move to the next level of thinking, what does it mean to change our fundamental understanding of how we can be recognized in public? Because there are companies who are working on trying to predict behavior and response based on the information that they collect about faces.
If we've got technologies that can maybe discern what mood we're in or how we're feeling, this raises the issue of mental privacy. As well as privacy issues about being identified all the time, is it right for technologies to be actually kind of saying what we're feeling all the time? Do we have a right to people not knowing if you're feeling angry or sad or nervous?
You go into the mall, oh, there are the cameras. And we just kind of seem to accept that. We've grown used to it. But those cameras are soon going to be smart. And that's kind of escalating what those cameras can do. And the fact that we're already used to them and that we don't see the smartness behind them makes it easier to add that extra layer of activity and data collection to them.
This is the right time, to think about regulation and when smart cameras should be used and for what purposes. Who should have access to the information? How long should it be kept? Can it be disclosed? Can it be used for other purposes and so on?
If we develop a good understanding of what the technology is, we are in a position to be able to make sense of it and protect ourselves from data exploitation.
Surveillance is something that really alters the way we feel about the world that we live in. If we feel like we're walking down the street and being watched and scrutinised, that's going to drastically alter the experience that we have while we're walking down that street. And so it's something that we need to be very careful with and only use where it's strictly necessary.
In some ways, we need to kind of move beyond pointing out what's happening. We know what's happening and think about ways of working out regulations and guidelines and public education. I think there's a lot of work to be done here in terms of raising awareness, but also raising the kind of public literacies around data surveillance and surveillance.